There's a strange era in history, often known as the Dark Ages, a period when humanity seemed trapped in a shadow of backwardness and stagnation. But what if everything we've been taught about this time isn't the truth, but instead one of the greatest secrets ever recorded in history? Was the Dark Ages truly an era of decline, as we've been led to believe? Or was it simply an elaborate cover-up designed to hide truths someone didn't want humanity to discover? Get ready, because what you're about to learn in this video might completely change the way you look at history. Right now, find yourself a comfortable spot, set the volume just right, and join Bedtime History as we uncover the deepest secrets hidden behind history's curtain. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss our next mysterious tale. When we hear the phrase Dark Ages, we often immediately picture a gloomy era, a time when civilization seemed frozen in darkness. It's depicted as an age when knowledge was lost, superstition reigned supreme, diseases ravaged communities, and endless wars consumed Europe. But what if everything you've learned about this period is simply the result of a misunderstanding, or perhaps even a carefully crafted conspiracy designed to manipulate how we perceive history? In fact, the term Dark Ages didn't originate during the era it describes at all. It was actually coined much later in the 14th century by Francesco Petrarca, better known as Petrarch, a renowned Italian poet and scholar, often considered the father of Renaissance humanism. When Petrarch first used this phrase, he didn't intend to label an entire millennium as worthless or backward, as we often assume today. Instead, he was merely expressing his deep sorrow over the perceived decline from the brilliance of the ancient Greek and Roman civilizations. To Petrarch and many scholars of his time, humanity's intellectual peak had been reached during the golden days of Greece and Rome, symbols of unmatched reason, art, philosophy, and science. When he looked back on the centuries following Rome's collapse, Petrarch saw only a cultural void, where the bright light of knowledge appeared to have given way to darkness. What Petrarch couldn't foresee, however, was how quickly his original meaning would be twisted and expanded far beyond his intention. During the 17th and 18th centuries, many Western historians, especially those associated with the Enlightenment, adopted the term Dark Ages for their own ideological purposes. They needed a stark contrast to highlight what they considered the superiority of their own time, a supposed era of reason, science, and civilization. Thus, the entire period from roughly the 5th to the 15th century was increasingly painted as a time of ignorance, superstition, and unworthy of serious study. The consequences of this politically and ideologically driven portrayal still resonate today. The medieval period remains associated with negative images: oppressive church rule, widespread ignorance, superstition, and backwardness. Many textbooks and educational programs continue to repeat these outdated claims, despite historical evidence that strongly contradicts them, a truth slowly coming to light over recent decades. Historical facts reveal that the so-called Dark Ages were anything but dark. Instead, it was an era marked by significant cultural diversity and remarkable progress. Numerous inventions and innovations emerged in agriculture, technology, construction techniques, and an expanding network of international trade. Another astonishing revelation is the critical role monasteries and churches played in preserving ancient texts and valuable knowledge. Medieval monks, often dismissed or overlooked, were the quiet heroes who tirelessly preserved, translated, and safeguarded vast amounts of classical literature and scientific wisdom, ensuring its transmission to future generations. So if the facts are this clear, why has history continued to perpetuate these misconceptions for centuries? Perhaps because this distorted view of the Middle Ages serves a specific historical narrative, particularly one that glorifies later periods like the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. By praising these eras, we've inadvertently and unfairly diminished the remarkable achievements of a misunderstood and undervalued millennium. As these hidden truths gradually emerge, we must confront an important question. Was this historical misunderstanding truly accidental, or was it deliberately engineered to conceal even deeper secrets? To answer this challenging question, we must journey back to the pivotal event at the heart of this long-standing misconception. The fall of the Roman Empire, the moment when history began to be shaped into a narrative we still haven't fully unraveled today. As we've seen, the idea of the Dark Ages originated from a nostalgic sorrow for the fall of the great Roman civilization. But did the collapse of this empire truly plunge the world into a millennium of darkness, as we're often told? Or is this just a simplified viewpoint created to conceal far more complicated truths? In the year 476 AD, Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, was overthrown by a Germanic general named Odoacer, officially marking the end of an empire that had dominated much of Europe and the Mediterranean for over 5 centuries. Traditionally, history depicts this event as a critical turning point, the end of civilization and the beginning of cultural and intellectual chaos throughout Europe. Yet recent, in-depth research reveals that history isn't nearly so straightforward. In fact, the event of 476 was far more symbolic than it was a definitive moment marking civilization's collapse. The Roman Empire had already been in decline long before this date. Since the 3rd century, Rome had struggled with deep-rooted problems, widespread corruption, internal power struggles and civil wars, pressures from migrating Germanic tribes, and chronic economic and social crises lasting centuries. These issues, not a single event, were the true causes behind the gradual weakening of the once mighty empire, eventually leading to its division into East and West in the late 4th century. Moreover, after 476, the territories formerly belonging to the Western Roman Empire didn't immediately plunge into chaos as we often imagine. Instead, this era marked the beginning of significant transformations and the rise of new kingdoms. Germanic tribes like the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and the Franks, often labeled as barbarians, actually played an essential role in preserving and adapting many important elements of Roman civilization. Far from destroying everything Roman, they actively inherited, reused, and improved upon Rome's legal systems, culture, and social structures. A clear example is the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy under King Theodoric, who ruled from 493 to 526. Although Theodoric was a Germanic leader, he greatly respected Roman culture, preserving its laws, traditions, and even ancient architecture. Historical evidence demonstrates that his reign was a period of remarkable stability and cultural harmony, where the blending of Roman and Germanic cultures created a society far more diverse, sophisticated, and resilient than commonly depicted. At the same time, the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, not only survived but flourished. Its capital, Constantinople, became the world's leading center of commerce, science, art, and culture. This empire played a crucial role in preserving, developing, and later reintroducing ancient knowledge to Europe, laying the foundations for the Renaissance centuries later. So why has history stubbornly portrayed Rome's fall as a civilizational catastrophe? Primarily, this stems from the biased perspectives of scholars during the Renaissance and Enlightenment. To glorify their own age of reason and scientific discovery, they deliberately created a stark contrast by diminishing or ignoring the significant achievements of the kingdoms that succeeded Rome. However, recent archaeological discoveries and historical studies are now turning this distorted view upside down. Findings across Europe in architecture, agricultural technology, cross-border trade, and meticulously preserved manuscripts in monasteries paint an entirely different picture. Clearly, this was not an era where knowledge was destroyed. Rather, it was a period of preservation, innovation, adaptation, and creativity in its own unique way. Monasteries and churches, often imagined solely as religious centers, emerged as genuine hubs of learning. Monks diligently preserved, translated, and even generated new knowledge from ancient sources. These religious communities became vital conduits, ensuring the continuity, rebirth, and spread of classical culture and scientific knowledge throughout Europe. When we consider this clear evidence, a bigger question emerges: why has history persisted in hiding and forgetting these important truths for centuries? Could it be that behind the familiar narrative of light and darkness, even deeper secrets remain? Secrets someone has carefully kept hidden from us all along? If traditional history insists that the fall of the Roman Empire plunged Europe into a 1,000-year darkness, the reality is far more complicated. In fact, even during the era supposedly mired in chaos, another power quietly emerged to fill the vacuum left by Rome's collapse. That power was none other than the Catholic Church, a deeply influential and mysterious organization that decisively shaped medieval society. In the centuries following Rome's collapse, the Catholic Church quickly rose to prominence, becoming not just a spiritual authority but a powerful political and social force. However, its true strength went beyond spiritual or political influence. It lay primarily in the Church's unparalleled control over the vast body of ancient knowledge inherited from the fallen empire. As Rome weakened, its great cities, libraries, and academic centers gradually fell into ruin due to war and social upheaval. A cultural and intellectual crisis unfolded on an unprecedented scale. Thousands of ancient texts, philosophical treatises, scientific manuscripts, works on mathematics and astronomy faced extinction. In the midst of this turmoil, the Catholic Church stepped into a surprising yet crucial role, becoming the final guardian of ancient wisdom. Behind the fortified walls of great monasteries scattered across Europe, from Monte Cassino in Italy and St. Gall in Switzerland to the legendary Vatican archives in Rome, monks quietly undertook a monumental and secretive task, meticulously copying, preserving, and safeguarding countless precious ancient manuscripts. These men dedicated their lives to carefully reproducing every word written by great classical thinkers like Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, and Cicero, ensuring that the light of knowledge would never fully vanish. But the Church's protection of knowledge wasn't driven purely by noble intentions. Alongside preservation, the Church employed a highly strategic and mysterious approach, systematically controlling access to this treasure trove of information. Not everyone was allowed to read these valuable texts, and not every book was permitted to be shared openly. By selectively releasing certain knowledge and deliberately withholding others, the Church positioned itself as the absolute gatekeeper of medieval intellectual authority. For centuries, monastery libraries remained strictly guarded, off-limits to outsiders. No one knew exactly what lay behind those locked doors, fueling endless mystery, speculation, and even suspicion about the Church's true intentions. Yet when certain secret manuscripts recently surfaced and became widely known, people were genuinely astonished. These newly discovered texts from the Church's most secretive archives revealed a shocking truth. Many scientific ideas celebrated as revolutionary breakthroughs during the Renaissance or Enlightenment had actually been studied by monks long before. Precise astronomical observations, advanced mathematical formulas, even sophisticated medical theories, previously branded as heretical, had quietly existed in monastery libraries for centuries before being introduced to the wider world. This discovery begs the critical question: Why did the Church keep this vital knowledge hidden for so long? The clearest reason, first and foremost, was power. The Church understood perfectly that knowledge equals power, and only by holding exclusive control over it could the Church maintain and expand its absolute authority within society. There was also genuine fear about social stability. Ideas that were too radical or conflicted directly with orthodox teachings, if widely spread, could trigger chaos directly threatening the Church's position. The great irony here is that the Church's secretive approach to safeguarding knowledge contributed to its later reputation as oppressive, rigid, and backward-looking. Yet recent scholarship forces us to acknowledge another truth. Without that quiet protection, many ancient intellectual traditions might have been lost forever. The ultimate reality lies somewhere between these extremes. Throughout the so-called Dark Ages, the Catholic Church was both the most dedicated guardian and the most mysterious controller of the immense intellectual heritage humanity inherited from antiquity. If the hidden libraries within medieval monasteries in Europe make us question who controls knowledge and why it might be concealed, the story of the Library of Alexandria, the greatest archive of ancient wisdom, reveals an even deeper and more haunting dimension, the immense tragedy of lost knowledge, a loss from which humanity has still not fully recovered. Built around 285 BCE in the Egyptian city of Alexandria, this library wasn't merely a repository of books, it was the very heart of ancient civilization. At its peak, it contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls covering every imaginable field: philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, geography, medicine, and even esoteric knowledge unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world. Alexandria became a magnet for scholars, philosophers, and scientists who gathered there to exchange ideas, debate, and pursue groundbreaking research. But the library's greatest mystery lies in how exactly it vanished, abruptly and controversially, over 2,000 years ago. According to the most widely told account, the Library of Alexandria was completely destroyed during a catastrophic fire in 48 BCE when Julius Caesar's troops battled in Alexandria. However, many scholars today argue that this fire might have been far less destructive, suggesting instead that the library suffered gradual loss over several centuries. Another prominent theory points to the 4th century AD, when Christian Roman emperors ordered the closure and destruction of centers of knowledge they viewed as pagan. Yet others blame the Muslim conquest of Alexandria in the 7th century. This uncertainty and contradiction have transformed the Library of Alexandria into a magnet for fascinating theories and even elaborate conspiracies involving power and control over knowledge. A critical question now debated by modern scholars is this: was the library truly destroyed entirely, or were many of its most valuable manuscripts secretly transported to safer, hidden locations long before total destruction could occur? Recent studies suggest that the library might never have been completely lost. It's possible that some of its most precious manuscripts were quietly moved to more secure locations around the Mediterranean, potentially even reaching medieval European monasteries. The discovery of ancient manuscripts in monasteries has fueled speculation about hidden connections between the Alexandria Library and secret European archives. Here, conspiracy theories begin to emerge. Some speculate that the Catholic Church or secret societies of the Middle Ages deliberately collected, controlled, and hid ancient Alexandrian knowledge, seeking to monopolize information for ultimate power. Even bolder theories suggest that some of the most precious texts, from advanced mathematical theories, highly detailed maps far beyond contemporary understanding, to cosmic secrets about the nature of the universe, were selectively protected and disseminated by secretive elite groups who carefully maintained their power by holding tight control over this priceless knowledge. Intriguingly, recent archaeological discoveries partially support these theories. Newly uncovered ancient texts indicate that deep insights into astronomy, mathematics, physics, and even technology believed to have first appeared during the Renaissance or Modern Age were actually documented in great detail in Alexandria over 2 millennia ago. If these documents indeed existed, then the loss of the Library of Alexandria wasn't merely a cultural tragedy, it was a devastating turning point in human knowledge, delaying civilization's progress for centuries. The boldest researchers even propose that the Library of Alexandria never truly disappeared at all. Instead, they believe it was intentionally dispersed and hidden by secret societies such as the Hermetic Order, the Knights Templar, or the Illuminati. These groups may have safeguarded knowledge from church censorship or political persecution, but simultaneously leveraged this knowledge to influence and manipulate historical events. While such theories remain controversial, one undeniable truth is the profound, lasting impact caused by the library's disappearance. The loss of Alexandria created an immense gap in human history, forcing us to spend centuries rediscovering what our ancestors once clearly understood. And one haunting question continues to persist. Just how much priceless knowledge from Alexandria still remains hidden somewhere, quietly waiting to be rediscovered? If the mysterious loss of Alexandria's library created a massive void in human knowledge, leaving us with deep and lingering regret, then in another corner of the ancient world stood a remarkable civilization, quietly preserving and passing on that precious flame of wisdom. This civilization was Byzantium, a beacon of culture and learning deliberately overshadowed by Western historians for centuries. The Byzantine Empire, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire, officially began in 330 AD, when Emperor Constantine moved the Roman capital from Rome to Constantinople, today's Istanbul, Turkey. This empire was not only incredibly durable, lasting more than 1,000 years until its fall to Ottoman forces in 1453, but it was also one of the medieval world's greatest centers of culture, trade, and intellectual achievement. Yet for some reason, Byzantium has been repeatedly overlooked, or even intentionally diminished, in the official history recorded by the West. While Western Europe is often depicted as having plunged into chaos and superstition, the so-called Dark Ages, the Byzantine Empire was, in reality, a brilliant light of civilization. At its height, Constantinople was a flourishing international metropolis, acting as a bridge connecting Eastern and Western cultures. Byzantium fully inherited the intellectual legacy of ancient Greece and Rome, while also embracing and enriching itself with cultural and scientific influences from Persia, Egypt, Arabia, and even distant civilizations of the Far East. This extraordinary synthesis produced a dazzling and sophisticated civilization unlike any other at the time. Perhaps the greatest symbol of Byzantium's remarkable technological and intellectual prowess was the Hagia Sophia. Constructed in the 6th century, Hagia Sophia wasn't merely a masterpiece of art, it was a marvel that showcased the Byzantine Empire's sophisticated knowledge of mathematics, engineering, architecture, and physics, far surpassing contemporary Western Europe's capabilities. Byzantium was also instrumental in preserving and advancing knowledge through its libraries, notably the Imperial Library in Constantinople. Scholars carefully stored, studied, annotated, and translated ancient texts of philosophy, science, astronomy, and medicine, works that might otherwise have been permanently lost. These precious manuscripts later found their way back to Europe during the Renaissance, significantly fueling the revival of science, philosophy, and culture throughout Western Europe. Yet this raises a troubling question. Why was such a brilliant and influential civilization so persistently overlooked or deliberately downplayed by Western historians? A primary reason lies in the biased and Eurocentric perspective adopted by scholars, particularly during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. To them, history revolved around Western Europe as the center of civilization, while Byzantium, seen as inherently Eastern, was portrayed as strange, foreign, conservative, or even backward. This ideological divide created a psychological barrier, causing Western historians to dismiss or deny Byzantium's profound contributions to their own cultural development. Adding further to this distancing was the deep religious split between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. In 1054, the Great Schism officially divided Christianity into two opposing factions, Roman Catholicism in the West and Eastern Orthodoxy in Byzantium. Acknowledging the substantial achievements of Byzantium, which had become Rome's spiritual rival, thus became politically and religiously uncomfortable for the West. This situation became even worse in 1204, when the Fourth Crusade, originally intended to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim forces, shockingly diverted to sack and plunder Constantinople instead. This tragic event not only left a deep wound, but also significantly widened the gap between East and West. Since then, Western Europe has largely chosen to erase Byzantium from mainstream history, hiding an embarrassing and contradictory chapter of its past. Yet, no matter how persistently the West has ignored it, historical truth remains undeniable. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 ironically triggered a large-scale migration of Byzantine scholars to the West, carrying invaluable knowledge preserved through centuries. This intellectual influx was crucial in laying the foundations for Europe's cultural, scientific, and philosophical renaissance. When we objectively revisit the full historical picture, it becomes clearer than ever that without Byzantium's silent yet steadfast protection of ancient wisdom, Western civilization's path of progress could have been dramatically slowed. The great paradox remains: this vibrant civilization, despite quietly sustaining the light of knowledge through a turbulent millennium, has been consistently and deliberately forgotten by the conventional narratives of history. If the brilliant Byzantine civilization was deliberately forgotten by Western historians, then there's another group of people who have endured even greater misunderstandings for centuries, those commonly labeled as barbarians. The familiar image we hold of these peoples, fierce Viking raiders, destructive Goths, and Germanic tribes blamed for demolishing the mighty Roman Empire, comes from deeply rooted historical stereotypes. But is this truly an accurate portrayal, or simply stories crafted by the victors to create a convenient contrast with their own culture? First of all, the term barbarian itself didn't initially carry negative connotations. Originating with the ancient Greeks, it described any people who didn't speak Greek. The unfamiliar sound of foreign languages, perceived as barbar, gave rise to the word. Initially, it wasn't a term of contempt or violence, merely a way to identify outsiders beyond Greek borders. But as the Roman Empire expanded, this neutral term gradually took on a more negative meaning. Anyone outside Rome's civilization was quickly labeled as barbaric, inferior, and uncivilized. Among those misunderstood peoples, the Germanic tribes offer a striking example. Though they've long been depicted as Rome's destroyers, they actually absorbed and learned much from Roman civilization. Recent archaeological discoveries reveal the Germanic people adopted advanced agricultural techniques and constructed elaborate settlements rich in culture. Intricate metal work, including weapons, jewelry, and household items, demonstrates they were not merely fierce warriors but skilled artisans as well. The Goths suffered an equally unfair fate. Popular history portrays them as directly responsible for Rome's decline, yet reality paints a vastly different picture. Far from destructive outsiders, the Goths actively sought integration with Roman culture. King Theodoric the Great stands as clear proof. During his reign in Italy, 493 to 526, he masterfully blended Roman heritage with Gothic traditions. Instead of dismantling Rome's legacy, he preserved its laws, safeguarded its architecture, and revitalized the economy, ushering in an era of stability and prosperity rarely acknowledged in conventional histories. But perhaps no group has faced more historical misrepresentation than the Vikings. These warriors from Northern Europe have been portrayed as bloodthirsty pirates who terrorized Europe for centuries. Yet recent archaeological research shows Vikings were remarkable seafarers, skilled traders, and courageous explorers. Sites like Hedeby and Birka have uncovered evidence of extensive Viking trade networks stretching from Northern Europe to the Middle East, North Africa, and even North America. Vikings built a vibrant culture governed by clear laws, developed their own writing system, runes, crafted rich mythologies filled with imagination, and maintained a well-structured society. In fact, many modern historians now argue that Viking raids inadvertently spurred the formation and unity of several modern European nations. So why have these complex and diverse civilizations been branded as barbaric for centuries? The answer lies largely in biased historical narratives crafted by the victors. Roman historians, and later Western chroniclers, deliberately exaggerated contrasts: civilization versus barbarism, enlightenment versus superstition, advancement versus backwardness. Their goal was to emphasize the absolute superiority of their own culture. As a result, groups like the Germanic peoples, Goths, and Vikings faced centuries of unfair misconceptions. Only recently, through fair and comprehensive archaeological studies, has the truth started to emerge clearly. These so-called barbaric peoples actually built remarkably innovative societies, skillfully adapted to their environments, and made significant contributions to global civilization. As these old prejudices slowly dissolve, we begin to realize that those labeled as barbarians were not nearly as barbaric as we've long believed. In fact, the true barbarism may lie in the biases and prejudices that have concealed countless valuable achievements throughout human history. All this leaves us with a compelling question: how many more historical secrets remain hidden, intentionally buried beneath centuries of prejudice and biased perspectives, just waiting to be discovered? If we previously discovered that the peoples labeled as barbarians were actually victims of historical prejudice, it's now time to delve deeper into a setting we think we know well, yet which conceals countless hidden secrets: the ancient monasteries of medieval Europe. Were these peaceful places dedicated purely to prayer and meditation truly as innocent as history suggests, or did they quietly hide profound secrets humanity was never meant to know? For nearly 1,000 years, European monasteries served as the last strongholds protecting ancient knowledge. As Roman cities fell into ruin, libraries shut their doors, schools closed, and widespread illiteracy engulfed society. It was the monks, secluded within remote monasteries, who quietly kept the flame of learning alive. They painstakingly copied manuscripts line by line, word by word, performing a crucial task: preserving cultural treasures for future generations. Yet the monk's role wasn't limited to copying text alone. A far more secretive and equally crucial responsibility lay in deciding which documents could be shared openly and which had to remain hidden forever. From this covert mission emerged another story, deeper and more complex than previously imagined. Today, with ongoing archaeological discoveries and more comprehensive research, we're starting to realize that inside secret libraries, behind sealed rooms in monasteries like Monte Cassino, Italy, St. Gall, Switzerland, or Cluny, France, monks once stored countless texts deemed heretical or forbidden by the Church. These weren't simply classical, philosophical, or scientific works. They sometimes contained revolutionary knowledge, discoveries, and inventions that, according to official history, would only emerge centuries later during the Renaissance or Enlightenment. One astonishing example is the discovery of ancient astronomical texts describing planetary movements around the Sun, long before Copernicus proposed his heliocentric theory in the 16th century. This revelation forces historians to ask a startling question. Did medieval monks secretly understand the heliocentric model, yet hide this knowledge due to fear of censorship and punishment by the church? Beyond astronomy, secret monastic documents reveal astonishing facts about medieval medicine. Monastery libraries in Germany and England, for instance, have uncovered manuscripts detailing complex surgical techniques, advanced wound treatments, and even sophisticated anesthetics, knowledge traditionally assumed to belong only to later periods. Yet these methods had quietly existed centuries before official history recognized their existence. Recently discovered manuscripts from secret Vatican archives show that medieval monks quietly studied Greek philosophical and scientific texts, as well as ideas originating from the Islamic world, ancient Egypt, and even distant Eastern civilizations. These bold ideas were labeled heretical because they directly challenged doctrines enforced by the Catholic Church. Therefore, monks had to carefully hide and protect these works, avoiding detection by religious authorities. But why couldn't monks publicly share this valuable knowledge? The answer lies in the strict control the Church maintained over knowledge during the Middle Ages. Church leaders feared that openly disseminating radical ideas could spark social unrest, directly threatening their own authority. Thus, they permitted only enough knowledge to maintain control, ensuring public obedience. Faced with these pressures, monks, despite understanding the significance of the texts they held, could only quietly preserve them, awaiting a future when such knowledge could safely emerge. Interestingly, the act of hiding these manuscripts was often not just censorship, but also a clever way to protect cultural heritage. Thanks to this secret protection, countless precious texts survived harsh periods of censorship, patiently waiting to be rediscovered. Nevertheless, despite these positive intentions, the concealment inadvertently created a huge gap in human understanding, lasting hundreds of years. As a result, humanity long believed the medieval period was entirely backward and ignorant, an age of darkness devoid of true intellectual achievement. Today, as these secrets gradually come to light, we're finally beginning to see medieval monasteries not merely as quiet retreats for prayer, but as secret fortresses, guardians of humanity's most important knowledge, protecting and preserving what history had sought to erase forever. If the secrets hidden within medieval monasteries have already shown us that history isn't always as straightforward as we're taught, the story of Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, and the Carolingian Renaissance he sparked further reinforces this truth. Was this period truly just a dim interval amidst centuries of darkness? Or are there deeper secrets that history has deliberately overlooked? Charlemagne, 742 to 814, is famously remembered as a brave warrior, a gifted conqueror who united much of Europe and became the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Yet few people realize that his most significant legacy wasn't just his military triumphs, but a powerful revival of culture, education, and knowledge throughout Europe after centuries of turmoil. Contrary to the common perception of medieval Europe as an age of ignorance, the Carolingian Renaissance, which flourished under Charlemagne's reign from the late 8th to early 9th centuries, marked a critical turning point, a rekindling of the cultural flame that had seemingly vanished with the fall of Rome. In fact, this era could rightly be seen as a precursor to the more famous Renaissance of 15th and 16th century Italy, though it has rarely been given proper recognition. So, what exactly happened during Charlemagne's reign that created such an extraordinary period? Unlike many rulers of his time, Charlemagne didn't limit himself to mere conquest. He passionately believed in education and knowledge as keys to creating a stable and prosperous society. He established a vast network of schools, libraries, and monasteries across his empire, intentionally reviving the classical Greco-Roman culture that had been neglected and nearly lost. One of Charlemagne's greatest achievements was gathering and sponsoring the brightest scholars from all across Europe, bringing them together at his royal court in Aachen. Leading this intellectual revival was Alcuin, an immensely talented scholar from England who guided a sweeping cultural revolution unlike anything Europe had experienced since the fall of Rome. Under Alcuin's guidance, Aachen became Europe's foremost intellectual center, where ancient philosophical, scientific, mathematical, and literary works were revived and spread throughout the continent. Perhaps the most lasting achievement of this era was the creation of Carolingian minuscule, a clear, uniform Latin script far easier to read than the chaotic writing styles that preceded it. This innovation directly laid the foundation for the modern Latin alphabet still used today. But the Carolingian scholars didn't stop at culture and literacy. They also achieved remarkable advancements in science, especially astronomy and mathematics. Newly uncovered manuscripts indicate that Carolingian scholars had studied ancient astronomical theories extensively, hundreds of years before Copernicus and Galileo introduced their heliocentric model. This revelation has forced modern historians to question whether groundbreaking astronomical discoveries, traditionally credited to later periods, were actually quietly known much earlier. Given all these remarkable achievements, why has this period often been overlooked or even deliberately obscured by mainstream historical narratives? One key reason lies in the biased storytelling of later Renaissance historians. To emphasize the importance of their own era, the Italian Renaissance of the 15th to 16th centuries, these scholars actively promoted the idea that Europe had been plunged entirely into darkness after Rome's fall. Recognizing an earlier flourishing Carolingian Renaissance would undermine the uniqueness they wished to claim for their own period. Consequently, historians have intentionally minimized or overlooked the true significance of Charlemagne's achievements. Moreover, recent research suggests that many valuable texts from Charlemagne's era were either lost or deliberately destroyed. Newly discovered manuscripts from forgotten monastery archives reveal that Carolingian scholars had secretly pursued ideas deemed radical or heretical by the medieval church. Out of fear of religious persecution or societal upheaval, these works were hidden away, lost or destroyed entirely, leaving future generations unaware of the true intellectual achievements of the Carolingian Renaissance. Today, as archaeological discoveries gradually reveal Charlemagne's hidden legacy, we can finally recognize his era more clearly and fairly. Charlemagne wasn't merely an ambitious conqueror, he was in reality one of the earliest architects of Europe's cultural and intellectual revival after centuries of chaos. Reflecting on this broader historical context, we see clearly that history is always filled with secrets and forgotten truths. Behind every story officially written, there are other realities, brilliant secrets quietly suppressed, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. If Charlemagne's Carolingian Renaissance revealed that history deliberately ignored significant cultural advances, it's time now to explore another widely misunderstood aspect: the remarkable technological innovations from an era unfairly labeled as the Dark Ages. Were these groundbreaking medieval inventions intentionally concealed from history? And if so, what was the reason behind this concealment? We've long been taught that the Middle Ages were stagnant and technologically backward. But recent archaeological discoveries have shown something astonishingly different. In reality, this period witnessed the emergence of technologies so advanced that even modern scientists today question the true capabilities of medieval engineers and inventors. One striking example is the mechanical clock. Official history places the first mechanical clocks in the 13th century, yet recent discoveries in ancient monasteries across Europe have uncovered intricate clock mechanisms with sophisticated gears and movements dating back as early as the 10th or 11th centuries. These complex devices have compelled researchers to wonder, who truly invented these sophisticated machines, and why did such remarkable creations nearly vanish from mainstream history? Medieval architecture also holds baffling mysteries. Gothic cathedrals, such as Notre Dame in Paris or Chartres, aren't merely artistic masterpieces. They demonstrate astonishingly advanced mathematical and engineering knowledge. The iconic vaulted ceilings, intricate flying buttresses, and spectacular rose windows required precise calculations and a deep understanding of physics that even today challenges modern engineering. Reconstructing these cathedrals with perfect accuracy remains incredibly difficult despite contemporary technology. Medieval military technology further underscores this point. Complex weapons like the trebuchet, able to precisely calculate launch trajectories, or sophisticated crossbows employing intricate mechanical triggers, emerged as early as the 13th to 14th centuries. Some scholars now argue medieval military engineers possessed remarkable knowledge of physics and mechanical principles, far ahead of what historical records officially acknowledge. But why did these groundbreaking medieval innovations nearly vanish from collective historical memory? One major reason lies in the intense control over knowledge by medieval power structures, especially the church and aristocracy. Allowing such revolutionary technologies to spread widely could destabilize existing social hierarchies. Medieval elites understood clearly that control over knowledge meant control over society. Concealing or restricting advanced inventions became their most effective method to maintain authority and prevent challenges to their power. Additionally, historians from the Renaissance and Enlightenment intentionally downplayed medieval technological advancements to bolster the prestige of their own eras. By creating the narrative that medieval times were completely dark and backward, they elevated their own achievements as uniquely revolutionary. Consequently, they deliberately minimized or even erased the extraordinary accomplishments that occurred during the Middle Ages. Recent archaeological excavations in historic cities like Aachen, Prague, Venice, and in castles and monasteries across Europe have unearthed convincing evidence of these sophisticated medieval technologies. Certain secret manuscripts from the Vatican archives further suggest that inventions long credited exclusively to the Renaissance or Industrial Revolution were in fact known and secretly studied by medieval scholars centuries earlier. Perhaps the most controversial discovery involves manuscripts from the 12th century in Spain and Italy, describing the fundamental principles behind early steam-powered engines over 500 years before James Watt's celebrated steam engine of the 18th century. Because these documents were deliberately concealed or restricted, humanity was forced to wait centuries longer to rediscover and advance this critical technology. The deliberate concealment of medieval technological breakthroughs has not only distorted our understanding of history, but also significantly slowed humanity's progress. The critical question now confronting us is, if even groundbreaking innovations like these could be hidden and forgotten for centuries, how many more important secrets are quietly waiting to be uncovered? Secrets that could entirely reshape our understanding of human history and progress. If the deliberate concealment of medieval technological breakthroughs already raises suspicion, let's now turn our attention to another event, one considered the greatest tragedy of the medieval era, the catastrophic plague known chillingly as the Black Death. Was this disaster truly just a random event of nature, or did it conceal deeper secrets, perhaps serving as a tool of power, whose full implications history has never fully revealed? According to conventional accounts, the Black Death ravaged Europe from 1347 to 1351, wiping out roughly a third of the continent's population. Officially, it's said the plague originated from infected rats arriving from Asia via trade routes. But recent research has begun raising troubling questions. Was this pandemic entirely accidental, or was it deliberately manipulated, perhaps even magnified, to serve hidden purposes? One controversial theory, difficult to dismiss entirely, argues that from the very start, the medieval elite, including the church and the nobility, recognized the advantages such a catastrophe could offer. Instead of wholeheartedly seeking a cure or containment strategy, they deliberately exploited public fear surrounding the plague to tighten their grip over society. Newly discovered medieval documents found hidden deep within monastery archives show explicitly how the church exploited the plague to reinforce its authority and control. It was widely proclaimed as God's punishment inflicted upon humanity for its sins, positioning absolute adherence to religious doctrines and church regulations as the only route to salvation. This widespread propaganda pushed ordinary people into unprecedented panic and obedience, creating a society more submissive and tightly controlled than ever before. Further evidence from modern studies indicates the plague's uneven spread and impact across different regions. While some areas quickly adopted strict quarantines, sanitation, and isolation measures, many others were suspiciously neglected, allowing uncontrolled outbreaks. Such remarkable disparities suggest a sinister possibility. Did local authorities, or even more powerful entities, deliberately abandon certain communities, permitting the plague's unchecked spread to weaken political rivals or remove groups perceived as threats? An even more controversial theory, yet increasingly backed by new evidence, mentions the supposed poisoning of wells during the plague era. Once dismissed as mere legends and paranoia, archaeological evidence and historical analyses now suggest these events may not have been entirely fictional. Could deliberate actions have amplified the plague's destructive power? The social and political aftermath of the Black Death is also frequently downplayed by conventional histories. While most acknowledge the drastic population loss, few examine how deeply it reshaped European society and power structures. Severe labor shortages provided the nobility and clergy an opportunity to construct a new, even stricter social order, centralizing power into the hands of the elite. New labor laws, harsh taxation policies, and stringent religious codes swiftly emerged following the plague, designed explicitly to solidify their permanent dominance. Even more shocking, newly unveiled secret documents from the Vatican and medieval monasteries indicate that basic medical knowledge capable of limiting plague transmission already existed early during the outbreak. However, instead of making these solutions widely available, those in power intentionally concealed them, prolonging public panic. This strategy served not just to ensure easier control, but also to secure their positions of absolute power indefinitely. These controversial findings force us to reconsider the Black Death from a radically different perspective. Once viewed purely as nature's devastating punishment, this disaster now appears far more complex, a calculated instrument of power, fully exploited to manipulate medieval society and politics. Ultimately, one haunting question remains. Was the Black Death truly just a random natural disaster? Or did humans, especially those pulling the strings of mainstream history, actively create or amplify it, transforming catastrophe into calculated political opportunity? And if so, how many other historical events, equally manipulated, remain hidden, waiting for us to uncover their true nature? If the Black Death showed us history could be manipulated or distorted to conceal deeper truths, it's now time to expand our perspective and uncover another critical truth, one deliberately forgotten for centuries: the pivotal yet hidden role played by Arabic civilization during the era commonly labeled as Europe's Dark Ages. While medieval Europe is often portrayed as submerged in intellectual darkness, the Islamic world was simultaneously entering a golden age of brilliance. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, major cities such as Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, and Damascus emerged as the world's foremost intellectual hubs. In these thriving centers, Arabic scholars diligently preserved, translated, and greatly expanded upon ancient Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian knowledge, elevating it to unprecedented heights. During this period, Arabic civilization played a profoundly influential role, one consistently downplayed or ignored by Western historians. Arabic mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, chemists, and philosophers carefully preserved classical works while simultaneously pioneering theories and applications previously unknown to Europe. Take mathematics, for example. Islamic scholars developed algebra, a word derived directly from the famous work Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala by the renowned mathematician Al-Khwarizmi. This marked a critical breakthrough laying the foundation for modern mathematics. In medicine, the Persian physician Ibn Sina, Avicenna, authored the Canon of Medicine, which became the definitive medical textbook in European universities for centuries. In astronomy, Arabic scholars constructed some of the world's earliest observatories, innovating precise astronomical instruments such as early telescopes and astrolabes. They not only preserved classical astronomical theories but also significantly refined them, producing accurate calculations about planetary movements that later informed the revolutionary works of European scientists like Copernicus and Galileo through indirect translations from Arabic sources. This knowledge gradually flowed into Europe through two primary gateways, Spain and Sicily, regions deeply influenced or directly governed by Arabs for centuries. Major libraries in Cordoba and Toledo, repositories of precious Arabic texts, became crucial bridges allowing European scholars to rediscover ancient wisdom, setting the stage for the Renaissance. So why has this vital contribution often been overlooked or deliberately hidden by Western history? The root lies in intense religious, political, and cultural rivalry between the Islamic and Christian worlds during the medieval period. Especially following the Crusades, 11th to 13th centuries, hostility grew sharply. Western scholars struggled to accept the uncomfortable truth. Europe's own intellectual rebirth relied significantly on a civilization considered their rival. Moreover, beginning with the Renaissance and continuing through the Enlightenment, Western history was purposefully crafted around a narrative that Europeans had single-handedly revived classical knowledge without needing any outside intermediaries. Acknowledging the Arabic role would undermine this narrative of absolute European superiority and break down the carefully constructed story of their cultural independence. Recently, however, archaeological discoveries in ancient libraries throughout Spain, Sicily, and European monasteries have revealed indisputable evidence that Europeans relied heavily on Arabic scholarship. Medical, mathematical, and astronomical manuscripts found in Latin clearly show deep Arabic influences. From Ibn Sina to Al-Khwarizmi, these texts provide undeniable proof of this essential transfer of knowledge. Indeed, without this critical bridge provided by Arabic civilization, Europe likely would have remained intellectually stagnant far longer. The Renaissance itself might have been delayed significantly. Today, faced with undeniable evidence, historians can no longer deny that cultural, religious, and political prejudices caused Western history to deliberately overlook or downplay the essential contributions of the Islamic world during Europe's so-called Dark Ages. But thanks to these recent archaeological and historical revelations, the story is finally being rewritten fairly, reminding us that history is always far more complex and multifaceted than traditional narratives suggest. If discovering the hidden role played by the Arabic world in transmitting knowledge to Europe forced us to reconsider how history is written, then now an even more shocking theory will push us to question the very concept of time itself. This highly controversial idea is known as the phantom time hypothesis. First proposed in 1991 by German historian Heribert Illig, the phantom time hypothesis made a claim that stunned historians. Nearly 300 years of history from precisely 614 to 911 AD never actually happened. According to this theory, we're not living in the 21st century, but rather still somewhere in the 18th century. Illig began his research by highlighting peculiar gaps and inconsistencies in European historical evidence. One of his strongest arguments is the remarkable scarcity of archaeological findings and historical documents from this nearly 3-century-long period. According to Illig, during these centuries, Europe appears almost frozen, showing no substantial development in architecture, technology, or economics. This raises a troubling question. Could these centuries have never existed at all, but instead have been artificially added, a phantom period deliberately inserted into our history? Another piece of controversial evidence presented by Illig involves Charlemagne, the iconic figure often seen as one of Europe's greatest medieval emperors. Illig argues that existing records of Charlemagne are surprisingly scarce, vague, and unconvincing. Could Charlemagne have actually been a fictional figure created specifically to fill this mysterious historical gap? The strongest controversy linked to Illig's hypothesis involves astronomical calendar adjustments. Official history states that the Julian calendar, established in 45 BC, accumulated small errors over the centuries, prompting Pope Gregory XIII in 1582 to implement a reform, removing 10 days to realign the calendar with astronomical reality. However, Illig pointed out a puzzling discrepancy. If 1,627 years truly passed from the Julian calendar's inception, the calendar should have drifted by 13 days, not just 10. Illig believes this discrepancy is clear evidence that almost 3 centuries were artificially added. Yet this hypothesis quickly faced strong opposition from mainstream historians and archaeologists. They argue that history didn't unfold exclusively in Europe. Continuous historical records and archaeological evidence from civilizations such as the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic world, and especially Tang Dynasty China during this exact period strongly demonstrate historical continuity. These civilizations provide ample documentation, chronicles, and artifacts showing no such phantom gap. Additionally, modern archaeological evidence, especially radiocarbon dating, also challenges Illig's hypothesis. Recent excavations of Carolingian-era sites throughout Europe have reliably confirmed dates that align precisely with the traditional historical timeline. Many historians thus consider Illig's claims scientifically untenable and incompatible with objective archaeological evidence. Yet, despite robust counter-arguments, the phantom time hypothesis continues to intrigue many who are drawn to historical mysteries. The reason lies in persistent anomalies Illig highlighted, which have not been fully resolved. Archaeological gaps in certain parts of Europe, or uncertainties surrounding historical figures like Charlemagne, remain open questions. Some proponents even suggest that historical manipulation or revision doesn't necessarily have to occur on a global scale. They argue that this phantom time may have been limited primarily to European history, intentionally introduced by powerful medieval institutions like the Church or influential emperors. This could explain why non-European civilizations show no similar gaps. Even though mainstream archaeological and historical evidence largely disproves the hypothesis, the greatest value of Illig's phantom time hypothesis lies in its fundamental challenge. It forces us to critically question the very nature of history and time. Is the historical narrative we trust entirely accurate, or can it be easily altered by those who wield power? Perhaps the most important insight offered by this theory is not necessarily its factual validity, but rather the critical reminder it provides. history is always far more complex than it appears. It cautions us that countless secrets and hidden gaps may still be waiting silently, undiscovered, urging us to remain vigilant and continuously question the accepted story of humanity's past. If the phantom time hypothesis forced us to reconsider how history can be manipulated, let's now turn our attention to another ancient civilization, one of the greatest victims of historical neglect, the Celts and their mysterious Druid priests. Did mainstream Western history deliberately obscure and distort the truth about them? And if so, why? At their height, the Celts controlled an immense territory spanning from Ireland, Scotland and Britain through France, Germany, and as far east as modern Eastern Europe. Between the 6th century BCE and the 1st century CE, they built a sophisticated, vibrant culture filled with remarkable achievements. Yet mainstream history often portrays them merely as savage warriors, fiercely violent and obsessed with terrifying sacrificial rituals. But perhaps reality is far more nuanced than these traditional accounts. One of the main reasons the Celts were misunderstood is that most historical records about them were written by Romans, the very conquerors who sought to impose their culture on the Celtic peoples. Julius Caesar, in his famous writings Commentari de Bello Gallico, Commentaries on the Gallic Wars, described the Celts as brave yet brutal warriors, highlighting especially their strange rituals, notably human sacrifices performed by Druid priests. These biased accounts created lasting prejudices, casting a vibrant civilization unjustly as barbaric. However, recent archaeological discoveries tell a very different story. Far from merely violent tribes, the Celts possessed advanced craftsmanship and an exceptionally refined culture. Excavations at sites like Hallstatt in Austria, Latane in Switzerland, and various locations across Britain and Ireland have revealed that the Celts were master metal workers, especially skilled in iron and bronze. The intricate jewelry, weapons, and tools found at these sites bear extraordinarily detailed designs, showing clearly that Celtic craftsmanship rivaled and often surpassed that of contemporary civilizations. Additionally, the Celts developed their own unique script known as Ogham, carved into standing stones. Contrary to their historical depiction as illiterate, these inscriptions weren't merely random symbols, rather they encoded complex astronomical knowledge, calendars, and deep philosophical ideas. Clearly, this was a highly intellectual society with an organized social structure and philosophical foundations. Central to Celtic society were the Druids, frequently depicted by Roman historians as mysterious, dangerous sorcerers or magicians. In truth, the Druids were far more than religious ritualists. They were spiritual leaders, intellectuals, scientists, and wise lawmakers. Their expertise spanned astronomy, mathematics, herbal medicine, and law. Recent archaeological evidence even suggests Druids might have used monumental stone structures like Stonehenge to accurately track celestial events, displaying an astronomical understanding far surpassing many contemporary cultures. So why did mainstream Western history deliberately erase or distort the truth about the Celts and their Druids? A critical reason lies in the Celts' primarily oral tradition. Druidic knowledge was rarely written down, passed instead through generations verbally. When the Romans invaded and conquered Celtic territories, they intentionally destroyed cultural and spiritual centers, targeting Druids to break Celtic resistance and more easily impose Roman culture and authority. Consequently, invaluable Celtic stories, philosophies, and traditions quickly faded into oblivion. Furthermore, Celtic culture prized freedom, revered nature, and demonstrated significantly greater social equality than Roman or Greek societies at that time. These ideals directly threatened imperial control and stability. Depicting the Celts as barbaric or primitive became an effective political strategy, allowing conquerors to easily justify domination and suppress resistance. Today, as archaeological discoveries continue, the historical narrative is slowly becoming fairer. A civilization rich in humanistic values, sophisticated technology, and harmonious philosophies, long neglected and distorted, is gradually reclaiming its rightful place in the historical record. This story reveals that history isn't merely what's recorded, sometimes it's what's intentionally hidden. The Celts and their Druids are powerful examples that history always harbors deeper mysteries, secrets still waiting to be uncovered, offering critical insights humanity continues to seek. If the deliberate forgetting of Celtic civilization and the Druids showed us that history isn't always objectively recorded, we must now turn our attention to another often misunderstood aspect: education during the Middle Ages. Was Europe truly plunged into total illiteracy, superstition, and ignorance as commonly depicted? Or is this a misunderstanding or even a deliberate distortion used to uphold the entrenched idea of the so-called Dark Ages? When we think of medieval education, we often picture a society engulfed in illiteracy and blind religious dogma, devoid of critical thinking or intellectual inquiry. However, recent historical and archaeological research is beginning to reveal a far more nuanced and complex picture than this long-standing prejudice suggests. To begin, it's true that widespread education wasn't as universally accessible in medieval times as it is today. But this doesn't mean the entire population was illiterate or ignorant. In fact, archaeological evidence from cities such as Paris, Bologna, Oxford, and Cambridge shows that as early as the 11th and 12th centuries, thriving centers of education emerged, rapidly growing and attracting thousands of students and scholars from across Europe. Universities such as Bologna, founded in 1088, Paris, 1150, and Oxford, 1167, provided not only religious teachings but also sophisticated instruction in law, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. Libraries at major monasteries and universities during this period contained astonishing collections of books, including carefully preserved and meticulously copied ancient manuscripts. This clearly indicates an immense thirst for knowledge and education. Recent studies of ancient libraries in France, Germany, Italy, and England reveal an intriguing reality. Medieval students weren't merely literate, they actively participated in profound academic debates, laying important groundwork for later scientific inquiry. Moreover, education wasn't exclusively reserved for nobles or religious clergy, as traditional histories often emphasize. New evidence from thriving commercial cities such as Venice, Florence, London, and Bruges proves that merchants and artisans, key economic players, also possessed reading and writing skills essential for commerce, trade, and craftsmanship. Letters, business contracts, and accounting records uncovered through archaeology reveal that a substantial portion of the medieval population could read, write, and practically apply their knowledge. So why has mainstream history consistently undervalued medieval education? The strongest reason stems from historians of the Renaissance and Enlightenment periods. To highlight their own cultural and intellectual superiority, these scholars intentionally portrayed previous centuries as intellectually dark, primitive, and backward. This stark contrast reinforced their narrative, depicting the Renaissance as a brilliant turning point that pulled Europe out of ignorance. Unfortunately, this narrative caused genuine medieval educational accomplishments to be forgotten, minimized, or entirely distorted. Looking objectively at recent evidence, we clearly see that medieval Europe wasn't as uniformly dark as commonly described. Instead, it was a complex, diverse era of significant educational advancement. During this very period, Europe's modern university system took shape, and substantial amounts of ancient Greek, Roman, and Arabic knowledge were preserved, studied, and further developed. Misunderstanding medieval education has not only deprived us of recognizing crucial historical achievements, but also diminished the essential role played by medieval scholars, monks, and intellectuals in establishing the intellectual foundations for future generations. Indeed, medieval scholars were instrumental in paving the way for Europe's later intellectual renaissance. Without their diligent preservation and expansion of knowledge, the cultural rebirth we associate with subsequent eras would likely have been significantly delayed. Recent discoveries in Vatican libraries, universities, and monasteries across Europe now conclusively demonstrate that medieval education was neither sparse nor impoverished. On the contrary, it was rich, varied, and significantly advanced, providing future generations with a precious legacy of knowledge. Today, as we gradually correct these historical misconceptions, we realize that medieval education was an essential chapter in Western civilization's journey, an important era intentionally distorted or forgotten, now finally deserving a fairer and more balanced reassessment. If recognizing the misrepresentation of medieval education has taught us anything, it's that history can indeed be deliberately distorted. But now, an even more sensitive and troubling issue needs our attention: the deliberate censorship, banning, and concealment of critical ancient texts for centuries. Was mainstream history intentionally suppressing these texts? And if so, what was really behind these mysterious actions? During the so-called Dark Ages, controlling knowledge wasn't merely about education, it was a vital instrument for religious and political authorities to secure their power. The ruling elite knew very well that knowledge had the power to reshape society. Thus, they ensured only ideas compatible with their doctrines and political interests were permitted to circulate widely. This intense censorship policy led numerous philosophical, scientific, and progressive texts from antiquity to be branded dangerous, swiftly hidden away from public view. One glaring example is the near-total disappearance of writings by philosophers such as Epicurus and Democritus, as well as significant scientific treatises by ancient Greek thinkers. Epicurean philosophy, emphasizing personal happiness, freedom of thought, and questioning divine authority, was clearly a threat to church dominance. Consequently, such works were quickly banned. Anyone caught owning or spreading them faced severe punishment. Similarly, groundbreaking scientific works such as Aristarchus's heliocentric theory or detailed astronomical observations by Hipparchus endured tragic fates. These texts directly challenged the geocentric model that underpinned the Church's spiritual authority. Thus, they were not merely forbidden, but systematically destroyed or secretly hidden. Had this knowledge become widespread, it could have shaken the foundations of clerical and political authority in profound ways. Recently, the rediscovery of certain long-lost texts underscores the gravity of this issue. A prime example is the recovery of Lucretius's ancient Roman poem De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, from a remote monastery in Germany in the 15th century. This text, profoundly discussing atomic physics and openly contradicting fundamental church dogmas, astonished scholars upon its rediscovery. It also raises a critical question: how many more significant texts remain hidden, awaiting rediscovery? Another remarkable find was the recovery of lost mathematical writings by Archimedes from a monastery in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. These writings, originally inscribed on parchment, had been deliberately overwritten with prayers. Only in the 20th century, using advanced imaging technologies and X-ray techniques, were Archimedes' extraordinary mathematical insights revealed once more, presenting knowledge long believed, discovered only in modern times. So, why were these invaluable works deliberately hidden and forgotten for millennia? The answer lies in the inseparable link between knowledge and power. progressive philosophical and scientific ideas inherently encourage awakening, independent thought, and critical inquiry, exactly what medieval religious and political leaders sought to suppress. They understood that widespread dissemination of these ideas would lead to questions and doubt about their absolute authority. Therefore, they chose the simplest and most effective strategy: destroy or conceal any texts that could inspire intellectual revolutions. The consequences of this deliberate censorship were enormous. Not only was invaluable knowledge lost, but humanity's overall progress was dramatically delayed. Scientific and philosophical insights that could have advanced civilization by centuries were forced to wait until the Renaissance or even the Enlightenment to be rediscovered and explored again. Today, as ancient libraries within the Vatican and monasteries across Germany, France, and Italy continuously reveal long-hidden texts, humanity is finally realizing that the knowledge possessed by our ancestors was far more advanced and sophisticated than mainstream history portrayed. Texts once thought lost forever are now gradually coming to light, showing us that humanity's intellectual history reached far beyond what our textbooks have traditionally taught. As these secrets slowly emerge, we realize clearly that history is not merely what was recorded. Sometimes it's what was intentionally concealed. The truths within these censored ancient texts could very well represent some of the greatest secrets history ever hid, vital truths that could profoundly reshape how we understand our past and ourselves. If the deliberate hiding of ancient European texts made us question historical accuracy, let's now turn our gaze toward a broader perspective. Another aspect intentionally overlooked and misunderstood for centuries: the very idea of the so-called Dark Ages. Was this truly a global period of stagnation, or merely a biased European narrative meant to conceal the uncomfortable truth that during this exact time, Asia was thriving and serving as the true center of human progress? First, we must understand that the term Dark Ages specifically refers to the particular conditions within Europe, not something universally experienced. In reality, at precisely the time when Europe faced significant intellectual setbacks and chaos, great civilizations such as China and India were flourishing in culture, science, and technological innovation. During the peak eras of China's Tang and Song dynasties, 7th to 13th centuries, China made groundbreaking inventions that altered the course of world history. It was the time of gunpowder, papermaking, printing, and the magnetic compass, innovations that would later profoundly reshape humanity. Few realize that movable type printing had already been developed in China during the Northern Song period, as early as the 11th century, nearly 4 centuries before Johannes Gutenberg introduced printing in Europe. Yet this fact is frequently ignored or downplayed by Western textbooks. Besides scientific achievements, China also saw remarkable advancements in culture and social organization. The imperial examination system created a highly educated intellectual elite with sophisticated administrative and governance skills unmatched anywhere else in the world at that time. Chinese literature and arts flourished dramatically, epitomized by the renowned Tang poetry of Li Bai and Du Fu, leaving an influential cultural legacy across neighboring countries like Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Yet mainstream Western history has consistently chosen silence regarding these extraordinary achievements. Simultaneously in India, the Gupta and Chola civilizations experienced similar leaps in science and culture. Most notably in mathematics, the revolutionary concept of zero was developed, today widely recognized as the cornerstone of modern mathematics. Indian mathematicians and astronomers like Aryabhata and Brahmagupta made significant contributions, from calculating planetary cycles with striking accuracy to developing early ideas resembling gravitational theory, centuries before similar insights emerged in the West. So, Why were these spectacular Asian accomplishments intentionally overlooked or hidden by Western history? A key reason was the rise of Eurocentrism, an ideological framework actively promoted by Renaissance and Enlightenment historians. To assert Western superiority, they deliberately minimized or entirely omitted contributions from Eastern civilizations. Acknowledging the reality that while Europe was mired in stagnation, Asia was achieving unparalleled advancements would have undermined the narrative of absolute European cultural supremacy they wished to construct. Additionally, political and economic motives played crucial roles. During colonial expansion in the 18th and 19th centuries, Western powers sought justification for their conquests by portraying Asian civilizations as backward, primitive, and in desperate need of European enlightenment. Admitting that these societies had once surpassed Europe would significantly complicate this narrative, making suppression of this truth strategically necessary. Recently, independent historical and archaeological research has begun illuminating these hidden realities. Ancient manuscripts, newly translated and carefully studied, have uncovered undeniable truths. The period Europeans call the Dark Ages was in fact a time of extraordinary advancement and flourishing elsewhere, particularly in Asia. Today, the immense accomplishments of China and India during this era can no longer be ignored or dismissed. Recognizing this truth represents a significant step forward in building a more balanced and accurate understanding of world history. It dismantles misconceptions sustained over centuries, enabling humanity to better grasp a historical period that was complex, yet incredibly rich in achievements. Today, as we gradually shed these old prejudices, long-hidden secrets finally emerge. We can clearly see that humanity's true history is inherently multidimensional. No civilization holds an exclusive claim to progress or sophistication. Only by abandoning the biased perspective embedded in traditional Western historical narratives can we fully uncover the greatest and most vital truths that prejudice and time have conspired to hide. If history has deliberately ignored the extraordinary achievements of Asia during Europe's Dark Ages, then within Europe itself another mystery remains, shrouded in half-truths and legends: the existence of medieval secret societies. Did these clandestine organizations truly exist, safeguarding ancient wisdom, or are they merely products of human imagination, woven from folklore, curiosity, and intrigue? In an era when knowledge was tightly controlled by the church and the ruling elite, it's understandable that groups would secretly resist such rigid censorship. Stories about these secret societies quickly spread, cloaked in mystery and sparking centuries of speculation. Who were they? What was their true purpose? And why was their existence always enveloped in secrecy? One of the most renowned secret societies of medieval times was undoubtedly the Knights Templar. Initially formed as a modest group of warrior monks in 1119 to protect pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem, within just a few decades, the Templars inexplicably became one of Europe's most influential powers. They controlled a vast and complex financial network and possessed hidden knowledge that even the Church found unsettling. Recently uncovered ancient manuscripts and letters from France and Italy indicate that the Templars held not only immense wealth, but also rare and precious documents from the Islamic world, including advanced texts in mathematics, astronomy, and science previously unknown in medieval Europe. The rapid and mysterious rise of the Knights Templar unsettled rulers like King Philip IV of France. In 1307, he conspired with Pope Clement V to dismantle the order, accusing them of heresy. Yet one significant question remains unanswered to this day. What happened to the secret documents and knowledge possessed by the Templars? Many scholars speculate these valuable texts were secretly hidden or passed on to other secretive groups becoming one of Europe's enduring mysteries. The story of the Knights Templar leads us to another legendary secret society, the Illuminati. Although officially founded in the 18th century, many researchers argue the Illuminati inherited knowledge and organizational structure from earlier medieval secret societies, particularly the Templars. Conspiracy theories and legends surrounding the Illuminati often speak of their goals to control knowledge, resist established power structures, and secretly influence major historical events. While modern historians typically deny the Illuminati's prolonged existence, the legend itself has profoundly shaped popular culture, reflecting a deep human desire to uncover hidden truths and recognize guardians of forbidden knowledge. Another lesser-known but influential secret society of the Middle Ages was the Hermetic Brotherhood, stemming from Hermetic philosophy rooted in ancient Egyptian wisdom. Hermetic beliefs revolved around profound cosmic knowledge, supposedly reserved for a select few initiates entrusted with its preservation. Newly discovered manuscripts from hidden libraries in Italy and Germany suggest that Hermetic societies indeed operated clandestinely, protecting texts containing revolutionary knowledge about alchemy, medicine, astronomy, and advanced scientific theories that terrified church authorities. Because these ideas directly challenged mainstream doctrines, they could only survive in secrecy, passed down through tightly knit circles and esoteric rituals. But were all these stories merely legends? Recent archaeological discoveries indicate that certain medieval secret societies and the knowledge they protected were more than myth. Ancient manuscripts found in isolated monasteries clearly demonstrate that throughout the medieval period, clandestine groups risked persecution to safeguard vital knowledge against church censorship and political suppression. Texts detailing alchemical formulas, meticulous astronomical observations, and advanced medical practices hidden away in secret locations prove undeniably that there were indeed individuals prepared to risk their lives to preserve humanity's intellectual heritage. Nevertheless, legends surrounding secret societies swiftly became integral to popular culture, exaggerated and embellished through countless books, movies, and conspiracy theories. This has made distinguishing fact from fiction extraordinarily difficult, yet regardless of the truth behind each legend, the persistence of stories about medieval secret societies highlights an undeniable reality. Throughout history, there have always been individuals who recognized the profound value of knowledge and were willing to protect it at all costs against censorship and oppression. It is precisely this spirit that breathes enduring life into stories of secret societies, not simply as myth, but as powerful evidence that no matter the circumstances, knowledge has always had its secret protectors. If medieval secret societies quietly preserved and protected ancient knowledge against suppression by the Church and Western political powers, there remains another great civilization whose pivotal role in transmitting knowledge into Europe still awaits proper recognition: the Islamic civilization. But why has a civilization of such brilliance been deliberately overlooked or even denied by Western historical narratives? Between the 7th and 13th centuries, while Europe labeled its condition the Dark Ages, Islamic nations from the Middle East to North Africa and Spain entered an unprecedented golden age. Great intellectual centers like Baghdad, Damascus, Cordoba, and Cairo not only attracted the brightest scholars but also became hubs for preserving, innovating, and disseminating cutting-edge knowledge to the entire world. One of their most prominent contributions was in mathematics. Persian mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, widely regarded as the father of algebra, authored the groundbreaking treatise Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, from which the term algebra originated, forming a cornerstone of Western mathematics. Additionally, the numeral 0 was broadly introduced, and disseminated into Europe by Arab scholars, a revolutionary leap in the history of mathematics. Astronomy also vividly illustrates the extraordinary achievements of Islamic civilization. Scholars such as al-Biruni and Ibn al-Haytham delivered groundbreaking studies on celestial movements and optics far ahead of their European counterparts. Al-Biruni calculated Earth's radius with remarkable accuracy and conducted meticulous astronomical observations. Ibn al-Haytham, known as the father of modern optics, clearly explained principles of light and refraction, insights that would take centuries for Europe to independently rediscover. Islamic civilization left equally profound marks in medicine, most notably through Ibn Sina, Avicenna. His magnum opus, the Canon of Medicine, consolidated medical knowledge from Greek, Indian, and Persian traditions and became the definitive medical textbook in Europe for centuries. Islamic physicians also pioneered the concept of modern hospitals, complete with dedicated surgical rooms, early anesthesia techniques, and innovative infection control practices. Yet despite these tremendous contributions, Western historical textbooks often omit or greatly downplay Islamic civilization's role. A major reason is the bitter cultural and religious rivalry between Christian Europe and the Islamic world, notably exacerbated by the Crusades. Post-Crusades, European scholars deliberately portrayed Islam as an adversary, obscuring its crucial intellectual contributions to maintain a narrative in which Europe alone was the center of civilization and progress. Furthermore, from the Renaissance onward, European historians crafted a simplistic and appealing narrative that the wisdom of ancient Greece was directly revived in Europe without intermediaries. Acknowledging the Islamic civilization's key role in preserving and transmitting ancient knowledge would undermine their claim of exclusive Western superiority. Recently, however, archaeological discoveries have begun to fill in these deliberate historical gaps. Ancient libraries in Toledo, Spain, Cairo, Egypt, and Baghdad, Iraq, clearly demonstrate that Arabic translations into Latin formed the essential foundation enabling Europe's rediscovery of classical Greek knowledge and thus the Renaissance itself. Without the preservation and innovation of Islamic scholars, Europe's historical trajectory and its rapid advancement in science and culture might have been profoundly different. Recognizing this truth is not only about historical accuracy, but also about justice and intellectual honesty in understanding human civilization. Islamic civilization represents more than merely an overlooked chapter. It is vivid proof that history often contains biases, deliberate omissions, and fabricated blind spots. Today, as these truths slowly resurface, the greatest responsibility we bear is to acknowledge these omissions openly and honestly. Only when we discard age-old prejudices can the brilliant light of Islamic civilization, deliberately hidden by Western history for centuries, finally reclaim its rightful and vital place within humanity's larger story. If Western history deliberately concealed the profound contributions of Islamic civilization, we must now confront another historical event, one that has been distorted and idealized for centuries: the Crusades. Beneath the holy slogan of liberating the Holy Land are there deeper motives and hidden interests that history has never fully revealed. For generations, books and movies have portrayed crusaders as heroic figures, Christian warriors carrying out the noble mission of reclaiming Jerusalem from Islamic control. Yet upon closer inspection, the reality is far more complex. The Crusades were not merely religious conflicts, they were also driven by profound political ambitions, explicit economic interests, and carefully concealed strategic power plays. Beginning with Pope Urban II's call in 1095, the First Crusade quickly became a powerful opportunity for the Church to consolidate and expand its influence beyond Europe's borders. Liberating Jerusalem was more than a sacred mission. It was a means for the Roman Church to unify the fragmented Christian world firmly under papal authority, reinforcing the Pope's absolute power. Beneath the religious rhetoric lay clear, practical ambitions for political and spiritual dominance. However, the Church was not the only power to benefit from the Crusades. Many European nobles and knights saw these expeditions as prime opportunities to acquire wealth, increase personal prestige, and expand their territories. Rich and strategic lands such as Syria, Palestine, and Egypt were enticing targets due to their control over vital trade routes linking Europe to Asia. Crusader states like Antioch, Edessa, and Tripoli quickly emerged as economic hubs, generating enormous profits for the European elite. The sack of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade in 1204 clearly demonstrates that religious ideals were not always the priority. The sudden betrayal and pillaging of a wealthy Christian city showed that Western powers would readily sacrifice their own allies to secure economic and political advantages. But is there an even deeper layer beneath these military campaigns? Recent research reveals that besides territorial and economic gains, another significant goal was acquiring the rich stores of knowledge held by the Islamic world. As Crusaders occupied territories in the Middle East, groups like the Knights Templar secretly collected vast numbers of Arabic texts on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy, knowledge meticulously preserved by Islamic scholars over centuries. This intellectual treasure was quietly brought back to Europe, significantly contributing to the continent's subsequent cultural and intellectual rebirth. Nevertheless, Western historical narratives often downplay the devastating consequences of these campaigns. 2 centuries of warfare caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent people, not only Muslims, but also Jews and local Christians. The cultural diversity, which had peacefully thrived for centuries in the Holy Land, suffered irreparable damage, leaving social scars that remain visible today. Even within Europe itself, the repercussions were profound. The enormous cost of these military campaigns caused severe economic hardship and intensified internal conflicts among European nations, each competing for newfound territories and resources. Yet why has Western history traditionally chosen to minimize or overlook these serious consequences? One of the primary reasons is that over time, the Crusades became symbolic of European courage, sacrifice, and religious idealism. Acknowledging the pragmatic motivations and tragic outcomes behind these expeditions would profoundly shake the carefully cultivated historical image constructed over centuries. Today, newly discovered manuscripts from European monasteries, lost texts uncovered in the Vatican archives, and recent archaeological findings in the Middle East are revealing a radically different truth about the Crusades. These wars were not merely conflicts between 2 civilizations, but calculated outcomes driven by political strategies, economic ambitions, and power struggles, motives intentionally hidden for hundreds of years. Recognizing this truth not only helps us understand our past more accurately, but also provides a crucial lesson about the dangers inherent in histories written solely by the victors. Only by courageously facing the real motivations behind historical events and acknowledging their devastating consequences can we build a more honest, complete historical narrative. Ultimately, this honesty is essential for humanity's growth and for extracting meaningful lessons to shape a better future. As we look back at this incredible journey of uncovering hidden truths from what we've long called the Dark Ages, one undeniable truth becomes crystal clear. History has always been written by the victors. Because of this, what we know about our past often reflects only a narrow perspective, filled with biases, misunderstandings, and deliberately concealed facts. Throughout this exploration, we've discovered that behind familiar stories are startlingly different realities. We saw how the Vikings, once portrayed as ruthless pirates, were actually daring explorers whose voyages connected and enriched cultures worldwide. We rediscovered Islamic civilization's extraordinary intellectual achievements, long neglected by Western narratives due to cultural and political prejudices. And we've come to understand that the Crusades were far more than holy wars. Beneath the religious facade lay complex political conspiracies, economic ambitions, and a strategic desire to control knowledge itself. All these revelations lead us to an unmistakable conclusion. History is never just what's recorded on paper. It's filled with enormous gaps, untold stories, and deliberately twisted truths. What we know is merely a small fragment of a larger, richer, and infinitely more complex tapestry. But why does understanding history accurately matter so deeply? Firstly, and most importantly, history shapes our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Misconceptions or distorted historical narratives lead us into dangerous prejudices, misunderstandings, and unnecessary conflicts between cultures, ethnicities, and nations. Only when we fully grasp our past in a fair and unbiased manner can we truly understand our present and build a brighter future. Secondly, uncovering historical truth is essential for protecting our freedom of thought and creativity. When history and knowledge are manipulated by power structures, society becomes vulnerable to control and exploitation. It's only by courageously confronting the hidden corners of history and daring to ask difficult questions that we can ensure our own intellectual independence and avoid repeating past mistakes. Yet despite everything we've uncovered, countless mysteries still remain ahead. Ancient civilizations yet to be fully understood, lost technologies waiting for explanations, hidden manuscripts quietly resting in ancient libraries. All eagerly await those who dare to be curious, brave, and ready to continue this incredible journey. Will we uncover even greater secrets in the future? Could the myths we've dismissed one day prove to be true? Or the certainties we've always believed suddenly collapse into doubt? Intriguingly, the answers to these questions rest in our own hands, because you, the one listening to these words right now, are an essential part of this journey into history. We'll continue to broaden our minds, ask bold questions, and delve deeper into the secrets of the past, because this is the only way humanity continues to advance and grow. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What historical mysteries do you think remain undiscovered? Which topics should we explore next on this journey? Please share your thoughts, ideas, and the historical mysteries that fascinate you in the comments below. Your perspectives will directly shape the next chapters of our exploration. Because history is never a closed book, it's a story waiting to be continued, written together by all of us.